Hello and welcome back to DCD's latest monthly newscast. I'm Zoe Turner and I'm a digital portfolio lead for DCD. And today we are going to be we are taking this monthly session to wrap up some of the key themes, take a look at the key articles and best stories from the industry over the past month. We'll also be going over observations from industry meetings that have happened recently around the world. And I'm so very pleased to have Matt Gooding, who is our senior editor, and Zachary Skidmore, who is our editor of Energy and Sustainability, joining us. Thank you both for taking the time.
No problem.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I'm sure there's a lot to cover. This industry is ever changing and things really don't stop. Matt, actually, if I start with you, I know there's been some big stories in the industry lately. Do you want to kick us off with maybe what's happening in New York in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, New York's become the first US state to impose a statewide moratorium on big data centers. Basically, this is going to last for a year or so, and it's really driven by the sort of the concern that people have about the cost and availability of power and the impact that data centers have on those. Zach, you can probably speak to this better than me because obviously it being your patch, but I think that's been the driver for this one, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's quite interesting kind of looking into the reads of the moratorium itself. It's focusing specifically on large load data centers, so any data centers with a capacity of 15 megawatts or more, kind of in line with a lot of the ratepayer legislation that has come out, which is focusing on these large load data centers. But probably, as you've seen within our coverage over recent years, especially, the commonality of a lot of these new developments is they're particularly large, usually over 50 megawatts. So it is likely to impact the majority of the kind of projects seeking to build within New York State. Quite interestingly, also, it includes several other provisions, including a generic environmental impact statement, which is supposed to assess data center energy demand, water use and quality, and air quality. And also, it directs the Department of Public Service to consider creating a New York Grid Acceleration Fund, which would actually require data centers to invest in the state's aging grid infrastructure. One actually really interesting tidbit about this is there is another piece of legislation currently making its way through New York's legislature, which is proposing a 3-year moratorium. And kind of looking into that, apparently, according to the governor's office, the decision was made to advance the 1-year moratorium over the 3-year moratorium, kind of due to the apparent complicated nature of the 3 years proposed bill. But they did denote that they would be working with state representatives on the kind of actually deploying the 3-year moratorium. So it'll be very interesting to see how this unfolds. Just a bit of context around moratoriums. We've seen them a lot in kind of counties and smaller cities. But as Matt mentioned, it's the first time that it's a statewide moratorium. There was one passed in Maine, but that was subsequently nixed by the governor over a data center project, which is currently also been, the developer of it has dropped out of developing it. So if you want to learn more about that, I wrote a piece about ratepayer legislation in our last mag. So if you're interested, have a look at that.
Yeah, would recommend. It's really good. I wanted to ask you, Zach, actually, is New York a bit behind in terms of the kind of legislation around large load users compared to other states? Because obviously we've seen different tariffs coming in different areas. It's one of the reasons.
I think maybe it's running a little bit in parallel. It's quite difficult to kind of keep ahead over all of the legislation being put forward, but there has been, I don't actually have the exact date of it's on February the 6th, the 3-year moratorium was proposed, which is kind of mirroring a lot of the other states because it's been a kind of a mad kind of rush to impose new legislation within kind of either the House or the Senate across the United States, and it really did start kind of snowballing earlier this year. I think we had over 300 pieces of legislation, probably more now, proposing either new rate classes or even moratoriums for data center developments.
I mean, there's a lot going on, and particularly in the legislation for data centers. I mean, in the States, it seems to go one legislation after the other after the other. As you said, like 300 pieces of legislation earlier this year is quite a bit, and we're only halfway through the year. Now, there's another story, I think, in addition to this, on what's called a ratepayer protection pledge. Zach, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what's going on there as well?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a nice comparison with the New York moratorium. Oh, well, and also kind of state-led legislation on new rate classes for data centers. This is firmly at the federal or government level, and it's been led by President Donald Trump, who initially brought in this ratepayer protection pledge back in March, where some of the tech sector's biggest names, including Google, Microsoft, Oracle, XAI, Amazon, and Meta, signed on. Just to note, this pledge is completely voluntary, so it's not kind of enforced in any way. I think a lot of the enforcement measures are based around the personality of the president, as so much actually kind of things these companies are signing up to. But the interesting thing about this latest announcement is it added 200 new kind of institutions or companies or utilities to the pledge. This included some of the biggest utilities in the country, such as American Electric Power, NextEra Energy, Duke Energy, and Southern Company, in addition to 29 new data center firms who signed up to the pledge, which included co-location heavyweights like Equinix, Digital Realty, Progilus. And one very interesting part as well is 23 governors also signed on to the pledge. I won't actually name them out now because we'll be here forever, but if you want to have a look at the news article we wrote about it, it's interesting to see that there's movement both at the federal level and also at the state level, and they're somewhat going towards the same way. It's just determining which one's going to have the biggest impact.
I think also, like you say, the proof will be whether anything actually happens as a result of this. I know following the initial one, XAI were making a big deal about how they were going to build a water treatment plant in Memphis, where their data centers are. And they've been talking about doing this for a couple of years. And it's going to take wastewater and turn it into usable water for data centers, and they're going to give a load of water to other companies as well. They just haven't done it. Like they said, it'd be up and running by now. It isn't done. And Elon Musk was like, well, we'll get onto it eventually. So when that will happen, I don't know. But if you'd listened to the announcement that his company made at the White House, you would think this was happening now and it was going to become a reality like pretty quickly, whereas we don't really know when it will happen. So I guess...
I was just going to say the interesting thing about that is because we've seen quite a lot of rollback in terms of sustainability commitments from big data center companies, reflecting kind of the tone of the current administration within the US. However, it's kind of moved towards community empowerment or protection of kind of regular ratepayers, which may be linked to the president's desire to have a positive return in the midterms. However, it is interesting to see how the market moves relative to the political situation within the country it's operating.
Absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, Zach, it's interesting to see how kind of across this ecosystem as well, these companies are kind of coming together to say, maybe we need to work together on this. To that point, you've touched on something there, which I think is interesting, kind of that sustainability point, particularly for maybe some of those larger hyperscalers. I think there's a report that's recently come out that maybe you can elaborate for us.
Yeah, so three of the biggest either namely Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, all released their sustainability reports. And it was very interesting to kind of look them over because they all reported either kind of increases in electricity consumption, with Google up 37% compared to last year, and also carbon emission increases, with Amazon reporting a 16% increase compared to last year, and Microsoft reporting a 25% increase. Just to note on the Microsoft sustainability report, they did note the fact that they stopped counting unbundled renewable energy certificates, which are kind of when you purchase or you sign a PPA or a virtual PPA, say in a particular state where you don't actually have operations, but you receive the renewable energy certificate related to the power. You're not actually getting the power directly. And there has been lots of criticism around that because they're not actually consuming the renewable energy produced, they're only just kind of purchasing the credit related to it. But all three of the companies cited the fact that AI demand is really driving this electricity consumption increase, and also as a result, the increase in carbon emissions, a lot of which is tied to the construction of data centers themselves. So supply chain emissions have gone up significantly. related to the year before. And another interesting kind of tidbit around that is the move by a lot of hyperscalers to rely on natural gas, especially in the short term, to power their really big hyperscale developments. I think earlier this month we saw, was it last month? Either of the two, we saw Microsoft announced a massive 2 gigawatt data center in Pecos, Texas, I believe, which is going to be powered directly from natural gas turbines. I believe it's a 2.67 gigawatt natural gas plant, which is going to be built adjacent to the site. So it's interesting to see how they're balancing still their kind of firm commitments to be sustainable. They're all claiming that they are covering their entire electricity consumption with renewable energy, but also going in the other way in terms of securing dispatchable power, which is kind of very critical within the data center sector if you want to remain kind of constant uptime within your facilities. So it was very interesting. I mean, I implore everyone I'm listening to have a look at our news stories, and it's really, really interesting to actually delve into the reports themselves, because compared to last year, it's quite staggering in terms of not only the electricity consumption increase, but also the carbon emissions increase as a result of it.
Absolutely. I mean, Zach, if I can ask kind of a follow-up there, is this based on the trends that we've seen from these hyperscalers, is this something we can expect to see in other maybe smaller players following suit, or even in different regions of the world as well?
So we've seen quite a few data center companies turn to natural gas, on-site natural gas generation, especially. It's been a mix between the large hyperscalers and also these kind of smaller scale companies who are seeking entry into the market, because otherwise they're going to have to wait, in some cases, 5 to 10 years for a grid connection, which really doesn't fit the business model, because it takes maybe a year to 18 months to construct the majority of data centers. So a lot of them have turned to on-site generation, but that isn't only solely within natural gas generation. I mean, there's been a few Oracle, namely seeking to deploy fuel cells at a data center, which, by the way, are natural gas powered, but because there's no form of combustion, they claim that it's a lot lower in terms of carbon emissions. But I do think it's going to be a trend we see continuing over the next couple of years, especially if the AI build-out continues at the pace that we've seen. They're going to have to find power somewhere, and unfortunately, not only in America, but across the world, grid infrastructure is ailing significantly. There needs to be a significant influx of capital and also the time to actually build it out to support this new capacity seeking to come online.
Yeah, I guess more generally, electricity use was falling around the world, right, for so many years, and suddenly with AI is rocketing up again. So, like you say, Zach, there's no choices there really but to turn to gas because it's there. And whatever your views on natural gas and its impact on the environment and the world we live in, it is there and it is being used, and I can't see.
I think also just, sorry to interject, but one interesting thing is maybe just in my coverage recently, we've seen maybe a move away of describing natural gas as a bridging solution. I think especially last year, there was a lot of talk about it being a bridging solution to small modular reactors or enhanced geothermal, some of these next-gen baseload, low carbon technologies, which, I mean, if we're being honest, probably won't see the light of day until the mid-2030s, really at the earliest, especially in kind of a mass commercialized manner. I see you laughing, but it is interesting that they're, I'm not saying rolling back, but the onus from this idea of natural gas as a bridge has kind of faded away a little bit.
It's like a bridging technology, like that enormous bridge in Scandinavia that just goes on forever and ever and ever, and never gets to the other side of it. That sort of bridge.
No, definitely.
We cannot emphasize enough the power discussion. As you mentioned as well, AI is on the tip of absolutely everyone's tongues, and power now goes very much hand in hand with that. So I cannot wait to see how that kind of develops over time. There's another story. I'm going to come to you, Matt, as well, that kind of caught my eye as well from this month. I think it's from Aligned, and a large deal they put together. But Matt, can you highlight a little bit the best bits from that story for us?
Yeah, definitely. So this month, the largest ever data center deal, takeover deal, closed. It was for Aligned Data Centers, as you say, Zoe. And a consortium of investors have paid $40 billion for Aligned. I mean, we talk about enormous numbers in the data center industry all the time, to the point where they don't really mean anything. But just think about that, $40 billion. So that's, I mean, nearly as much as Zach earns, certainly. And, it's just an insane number when you think about it, particularly because, I mean, aligned, and I don't mean this in a bad way. They are not an exceptional company. They are not building any kind of really novel infrastructure. They are not building one of these single enormous campuses like you see that OpenAI and Microsoft and Meta like tout around. What they have got though, which goes to our discussion earlier, is access to a big pipeline of power, either in capacity which they've already built or capacity which they claim they've got secured. So they say they have 6.4 gigawatts of power in built capacity, but also in contracted capacity ready to go into future data centers. They've got a network of 51 data centers across the US, and the new owners, which is Global Infrastructure Partners, AI Infrastructure Partnership, which is very different, but also backed by similar people, along with MGX, who are an Abu Dhabi-based investor, which I think are backed by the Abu Dhabi state. They between them have put up $40 billion, for Aligned. So it will be interesting to see what happens to the company, whether it sort of continues on its current trajectory or whether it explodes and goes into another stage of growth, and also what this means for M&A in the data center sector in general. I think that this deal completely dwarfs the previous largest deal which we've ever seen in the sector, which was $24 billion for AirTrunk last year. There's a piece on our website which our editor-in-chief, Dan Swinhoe, lovingly edits on the biggest data center deals in history, and this is by far the largest. So I think what this means for the capital in the market, we'll wait and see whether there are other big blockbuster deals on the horizon. But certainly, I think it indicates that if you've got a lot of power and you can build data centers, then investors really, really want you.
I hate to draw a parallel with the football or soccer for our American listeners transfer market, but is this likely to set a precedent for maybe future M&A deals within the sector? If something, as you described, not the most prominent data center company went for $40 billion, if we could see potentially a larger or more prominent data center company within the space going up for sale, would it potentially dwarf the numbers paid for Aligned?
I mean, yes. I mean, potentially. You sort of always think you're getting to the top of the market, but it never seems to happen. I think the AirTrunk deal surprised us last year. They were predominantly APAC based data center company, and they went for 24 billion. And this year we've got a 40 billion company. I don't see why, if a more appealing proposition came onto the market, that the funds just seem to be there at the moment. Certainly in the near term to do an even bigger deal, but whether we will. You would assume that eventually this scramble for capacity will reach its limit, but certainly we don't seem to have reached that just yet.
Zach, I'm so glad you mentioned the football kind of transfer market, because I had the exact same thought, and all I could think was 40 billion is a huge number, particularly for the data center industry. Yeah. But if we start seeing football players at the same price, then I think we need to have a discussion about where we're going.
As a Cambridge United fan, I wish we had a $40 billion transfer budget to help us fight.
Yeah, but Mbappe playing for you, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think we're the equivalent of buying CPU. We have a budget enough to buy a CPU from 1995, probably. So could do with something a bit bigger.
It's a good comparison, though. I mean, thinking even 10 years ago, 40 billion for a data center development or a project like this maybe was a little bit out of the realms, but we'll definitely have to see how the numbers are going to increase.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Matt, I do want to come to you on another point. I think actually fairly recently there's been a further announcement from Submer data centers. Now, can you tell us a little bit what's going on with them?
Yeah, definitely. So Submer are viewers may know them as a cooling company. They are one of the biggest names in immersion cooling, which, I mean, I can go into detail. I love cooling, but I won't for reasons of brevity. But they're an immersion cooling company, and they have decided to run their own data centers rather than just putting their equipment into other people's. So they have formed this new brand called Rubik's Data Centers, which they announced in full details earlier this year. And I spoke to one of their executives when I was at the OCP conference in Barcelona in April, and it was super interesting. He has some very ambitious plans, I would say, to quickly deploy these data centers. They've got a few $1 billion behind them. And I was like, okay, sure, mate, really good. But they have actually started doing it. They have announced a project in Barcelona, a former chemical plant, which is they're going to spend $1 billion on, and they've also got one in the works in Kentucky in the US, which they're both. We haven't got full details of capacity and stuff yet, but one would assume there will be reasonable sized data centers catering for AI workloads, given the amount of money involved. I think this story is quite interesting because the way the sort of wider cooling market is going, I think in the last couple of years we've seen quite a lot of consolidation of cooling companies as liquid cooling takes hold, and the bigger players want to add liquid cooling capabilities to their portfolio of products. So, like for example, we saw Motivair taken over by Schneider Electric, one of the biggest deals a couple of years ago, and that's starting to show through in their portfolio now. So clearly, if you're a cooling company, one way of going about growing your business is to acquire some of your rivals and get a greater reach that way. But clearly, Submer have decided that they can go after the full stack of the data center development business. They can build them, they can cool them, they can power them, and they can run them themselves. And I think as a business model, it will be interesting to see how they succeed, whether they can make it work, whether they can meet their targets, which are quite lofty. And if this is a potential route for cooling companies and other vendors to think we can run the data centers as well as making the equipment that is critical to operating them.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting to see how, because there's a lot of companies, either data center or cooling companies, that offer, end-to-end solutions. Now I think Submer can say even further one step that they're really end-to-end because they provide the whole Megillah.
But it comes
back
to the power thing as well. Like if you can find access to power, why not just run the whole data center yourself? Because that is the thing that the hyperscalers particularly, and that's what Submer have said they're targeting, are going to look at. Can you get power? And can you get it to us quickly? And if they can do that, then why not run the data center too?
Absolutely. No, definitely makes sense. Now, thinking about some of the other amazing pieces that you guys have put out this month as well, there's I think the most recent supplement as well, which is kind of beautifully timed with our AI week, which happened this past week. Matt, can you dig into what are the interesting things about this latest AI supplement? Who are the people that you spoke with? I guess, how does this kind of reflect what's going on in the industry as well? But please give us a bit more detail.
Absolutely. Well, the best thing about this supplement is I didn't write any of the features, so obviously the standard is extremely high. As you say, Zoe, we put it out to coincide with DCD's AI Week, which has been really interesting. Some great talks and discussions put on by the broadcast team. The supplement itself is a mini magazine, and it focuses on agentic AI, because I think if you're interested in technology and AI, you would not have been able to escape agentic AI for the last couple of years. The idea that AI systems will autonomously complete tasks for you and speak to each other, and things like that, which is often cited as one.
Or hack other people's companies.
Yeah, break out of sandboxes in a way which may or may not have been a publicity stunt, but we won't get onto OpenAI. So we've been talking about agentic AI through the prism of the infrastructure which is used to run these systems. So Seb, our publisher, spoke to Intel about their data center CPU, which they put out specifically for AI workloads, which ties quite nicely into something we'll probably speak about in a minute, which is AMD are basically doing the same thing, and NVIDIA are doing the same thing, and they're all putting out these CPUs in the hope of getting some business in the agentic AI sphere. So Intel spoke to us about their effort and why it's the best one. Obviously, they would say that. Charlotte, our colleague, our compute storage and networking editor, was at the Dell World event in Vegas, and she spoke to Dell about their sort of agentic offering. I think the interesting thing about Dell is that they are using agents themselves within their business. So Charlotte got the lowdown on how they're doing that and what that does for them from a sales perspective, because they say it can help them show their customers how they can use agents and the best ways to deploy them and things like that. The other feature in there, which is really good, also from Seb, he spoke to a new neo cloud provider called Vector Core Compute, which has been set up. It's using some hardware from Sambonova, which is another chip maker, and they are building a neo cloud specifically for agentic workloads. So this will be deployed in edge data centers. They've got quite big plans to set these up across the US, but smaller edge data centers near the end users where they can run agentic workloads. So Seb spoke to them about how that's going to work and when that might happen. So we've got a whole nice collection of stories about agentic AI on the website. I would advise you to head over there. It's free to read. You just have to register and find out more.
Fantastic. I mean, as you say as well, this coincides with our AI Week broadcast last week. Did you, I think the Agentic AI supplement you guys put together was also in partnership with Vertiv. And we've had a lot of Vertiv episodes in the past AI Week as well. So encourage, of course, the audience to go and definitely read that supplement and take a look at the AI Week episodes, which should now be on demand. Now, moving on, because Matt, you've mentioned a few events there as well. One in particular I want to highlight, and hopefully you can give us kind of the best bits, the big announcements, was the AMD event last week. What were kind of the biggest highlights from that event?
Yeah, so AMD held their sort of annual, get together. We had a couple of reporters there to cover all the big announcements. They launched their Helios rack, which is a sort of double width rack, which they trailed last year at the conference. It's basically designed to fit more hardware into it, basically, so you can run AI stuff. They've announced the first deployments and OpenAI using it and some other companies, and they've come up with some reference designs with Schneider Electric so that people can easily integrate this with their wider data center cooling and power technology, which is obviously a really important step for data center operators considering deploying this, because it's quite a change. It takes up a lot more space, and obviously, if you fill a double width rack with AI hardware, it's going to use a lot more power and need a lot more cooling. So that was quite an important announcement, and it'll be sort of, I guess, the next few months we'll be seeing how those deployments actually work and whether people are actually using it as much as AMD claim that they will. I think the other big announcement was a partnership which they're doing with, I can never pronounce this company right, but I'm going to have a go. Cerebrus, I think it is. They make really big chips, like physically massive. Like if you Google it, you'll see their chips very big. And they've worked with AMD to come up with a sort of chip which is designed for AI inference workloads, because alongside the sort of agentic things that we discussed, the kind of prevailing kind of opinion in the industry seems to be that this is going to be where a lot of money is spent. The inferencing workloads using the AI systems to do tasks. So they've come up with this sort of combined offering, the sort of between the two companies, which kind of mirrors something which NVIDIA have done last year. They did a sort of a deal with this company called Grok, who also make chips specifically for inference, called LPUs. They didn't really acquire them, but they sort of did that acqui-hire. They sort of took a lot of their, they licensed their technology and hired a lot of their executives, which seems like an acquisition to me, but it technically was not one. So AMD are kind of mirroring what NVIDIA and Grok are doing through this partnership with Cerebrus, and I think clearly both companies think there's a lot of money to be made by selling chips for inference workloads, and how that will pan out and who will be the dominant force in that market, or indeed whether there'll just be space for all of them. I guess we will see as the AI market matures.
That definitely makes sense. You raise an interesting point there of, is there space for all of these different companies and these different providers in the market? I mean, and as you've said, there's a bit of a mirror between what AMD are currently looking at to what NVIDIA maybe have done. Is this a trend maybe we're going to see for the future as well, where it's going to be NVIDIA does something, and absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, but NVIDIA does something and other companies then try to replicate or tailor it themselves?
Yeah, definitely. And I think vice versa, with NVIDIA sort of taking on other people's ideas. I think you've seen the proliferation of sort of AI-focused CPUs. We talked a bit about Intel's one earlier, and AMD have one, and NVIDIA have one, and ARM last year or earlier this year announced that they were making their own one. The first time they've made a chip which they will sell themselves rather than making chips for or designing chips for other people. So, and then beyond that, you have the hyperscalers all with their own sort of custom hardware products of various flavors and uses and at different stages of development. So I think, yes, definitely it seems like there's just a never ending market at the moment. So I think there's probably space for them all, but whether we'll see winners and losers in terms of who grabs the biggest market share, I think is probably likely, but it's not obvious who those will be at this point.
That makes a lot of sense. When you said never-ending market, all I heard was the never-ending story tune in my head with the sale going through the data center world.
Zach can give us a little rendition, I'm sure.
I don't know that song, honestly.
Yeah. That's what they all say. Anyway.
Well, to come to you, Zach, as well, because you have been hither and yon over the past month at different events and different partner stories to tell. So tell us, A, where you've been, B, what have you learned, and C, what does this mean for the wider market?
Yeah, sure. I was a bit on the road this past month. Firstly, I went to Houston, Texas. I was invited out by a company called Gradient, which works on water treatment within data centers, but also the semiconductor and other industrial markets. And it's very interesting that they're developing, they have developed a closed loop kind of cooling system for data centers, which ensures that there isn't any water wastage during the process. I'm going to write a long form piece on the company for our next magazine, so I won't give too much away, but it was really, really interesting. They gave me a tour of their research facility in Houston, showing me all the kind of the gadgets and the technology that they're developing there. One very interesting part I found was their technology focused on removing PFAs from water after its use within the semiconductor industry specifically. And essentially, this is a very kind of a broad overview of what they do. I think if you really want to understand, go on their website or contact them directly. However, what they're doing is they're basically concentrating the PFAs within the water and then subsequently directing it to a box, which they actually, I think they called it the destructor, which is essentially just completely remove them or the PFAs from existence, essentially. So it was a really, really interesting tour. I hope everyone will read my feature on it in the upcoming magazine, which is June, September. And after that, I went to Lyon. I was invited out by the cabling company Nexans, which is one of the biggest cabling companies in the world. And they were showing me all things related to direct current. And I'm sure if you've been following the market, you've come across DC or direct current. And it was just very interesting, not only the applications for the data center sector, especially the 800-volt DC cabinets, which are really coming into the vogue and expected to really play a massive role in AI development over the next couple of years, but also just general utility, because I think the biggest thing about the use of direct current is not the lack of need for conversion. So a lot of the time when you're converting DC to AC, so if you're generating power from, say, a solar array, it generates in direct current, but in order to be used within appliances, it subsequently needs to be converted into AC, which leads to a lot of power loss. So the kind of big hope is that if we start developing DC architecture or DC architecture within not only data centers and industry, but also just in normal homes, it will be a lot more energy efficient. So they showed me around their kind of the R&D center. One very interesting thing they showed me was their fault testing. So essentially they get all their cables and they put them either in a kiln, so they expose it to really, really, really high heat in order to demonstrate whether it's effective in preventing outages during these fires, which are quite prominent. Well, I wouldn't say quite prominent, but they do happen on occasion within data center environments, especially within battery rooms. And one very interesting technology they showed me was one of the cables which actually turns into ceramic under high heat. So it protects the cabling within, so it prevents the outage. And it's just, they literally showed me, it was really cool. There was a former cable which just turned into ceramic. So yeah, really interesting visit. So I appreciate both Nexans and Gradient from inviting me out to visit them.
That is really interesting because particularly on our telecoms channel, we see a lot of conversations and we have a lot of conversations around the next generation of fiber, looking at optical fiber, even looking at hollow core now. having a cable turn into essentially to ceramic to protect the infrastructure and to maybe keep it from needing to be replaced or traded out as quickly as some others is an interesting concept. So that's really going to be interesting to see what they do for the future with that.
I was just going to say it's quite overlooked, especially if you're just looking at the data center sector specifically. That the cabling and the wiring, which is so important for delivery of power. I mean, we don't really think about it that much, but we do report on a number of companies developing like supercapacitors and stuff like that, which will be able to deliver a lot more power to data centers. But I think it's often overlooked and how important it is for the health of the industry and also the development of all these AI data centers. We need to kind of all the entire ecosystem around them to flourish as well in order to support all this expected load growth.
Absolutely. Can't agree more. Now, I have to say, unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time. So one thing I do want to do, as you've mentioned, Zach, as well, you guys have a magazine coming out in September, but there's a lot more stories that you guys are currently working on that maybe you'll be able to dig into a little bit down the line. But if you could give us a bit of a tidbit on what's upcoming. Matt, to start with you, maybe, what is the next big story, I guess, you're working on that you think is maybe interesting for the audience at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I'm diving into the world of data centers at sea, basically. So I have done some really interesting interviews with people who are building underwater data centers, but also those who are wanting to float them on barges or ships or basically any kind of ocean-bound data center. And I think this is a trend. Well, it's a trend we've seen in the last few months, and I think it's going to become even bigger in the sort of coming months, because we all know that alongside power, land, capacity for data centers is also a big issue, particularly in communities where a lot of people live and they don't necessarily want to, all the land being used up by big data centers. So we're seeing an increasing sort of spread of companies looking to the sea, thinking we can put the servers out at sea in various different ways, and there's some advantages to that in terms of cooling and stuff. Obviously, the biggest one being, no one lives there, so it's not in anyone's back garden. So I think probably a good indicator of the sort of timeliness of this is that Y Combinator, the famous tech business kind of developer and accelerator program in the US, has included compute at sea as one of its big themes in its current sort of intake of startups. So we're seeing a lot of companies develop in this area, and I'm looking forward to writing about why it can be a good idea and why it can also be a very bad idea in my feature, but you'll have to wait to read it to find out why this is.
Absolutely. I think data centers at sea always, I think it's common around the industry, the thought of a data center and the cables and the compute inside being near water makes me a little bit nervous. But I know there's been past attempts at this as well, I think, in China and even with Microsoft, I think over a decade ago. So really, really excited to see how that pans out as well.
Yeah, it feels counterintuitive in a lot of ways, but there's definitely some benefits to it, but there's a lot of unanswered questions too.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully,
just interject really quickly, because I did write a piece in our critical power stuff at the beginning of the year, which is kind of tangential to this, but it was interesting. I think it's the company Ship that was proposing the development of offshore data centers on large ships powered by hydrogen cracking. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit if anyone wants to delve a little bit deeper into the subject before Matt releases his really expansive piece on the matter.
Well, gentlemen, I know there's a lot more that we could cover, a lot more that you're currently writing about, but unfortunately we've run out of time for today. So thank you sincerely for taking the time to speak with us today, and absolutely keep on writing. There's a lot more to come. We can't wait to see what you guys have.
Okay, thank you, Zoe. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
And to our audience who are watching at home, at work, or on your commute, thank you as well for joining us today on our monthly newscast. All of the stories and discussions that we've had today can be seen on the DCD website. We'll make sure that we've got the links to those articles as well for you to view. But thank you again. Wonderful to speak with our editorial team. And there's a lot more to come from DCD in the future. So do join us again next month for the next monthly newscast.